千里之行，始于足下. A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Welcome to Tao Talks with Derek Lin, where we take a deep dive into the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. As always, I would like to extend a warm welcome to one and all. Thank you for joining us. I would like to invite you to center your thoughts and direct your attention to this moment in time, to the here and now, to be fully present and mindfully aware as we all ready ourselves for this sacred process in the Tao with one another. Chapter 79, as I'm sure everyone recalls, is the left contract, meaning the left part of the contract. Contract specifically means the ancient Chinese practice of keeping track of loan agreements. Now, we talked about the metaphorical nature of this right here. It is a certainty that Lao Tzu was not talking about the literal lending agreement between two people. Rather, he was addressing the spiritual interactions among people when the lender is a person rendering assistance, spiritual assistance to another person who would be the lender, who would be the borrower, pardon me, in this scenario, in this metaphor. And the important point that Lao Tzu wanted to make was that the lender in the scenario would not be demanding repayment from the borrower. So we'll be revisiting that point as we wrap up this section. Another significant factor to be aware of is that this chapter, chapter 79, contains the final points from Lao Tzu about virtue, the concept of virtue. We began with his discussion about virtues, various aspects of it, starting back in chapter 38. And here we are in chapter 79, talking about the last points. Beyond this point, as we will see later on today, we will get into the concluding remarks of Lao Tzu. For now, though, let's go ahead and finish up chapter 79. So here's how chapter 79 looks. It's a relatively short chapter, and we were able to divide it into 4 sections. So the 4 sections are mostly 2 lines each. It is possible to combine the first couple of lines into 1 line, making it 8 lines with 4 sections of 4 couplets. And the sections started out talking about disputes among people, using the lending agreement as a metaphor about what happens when there's some kind of discord, some kind of contention between people about a particular thing, that the disagreement may be resolved, but there will be remaining resentments, no matter what. And this is the reason why, in section 2, the sages hold the left part of the contract as the lender in a spiritual exchange, a spiritual interaction, but then will not use it to demand payment, to be repaid for his efforts from the other person, the borrower. That is section 2. Section 3 drives home the point that those who hold the contract, like the sages, for helping other people, they are the ones who possess true virtue. Whereas the ones who act in opposite ways to the virtue of the sages, that is, they constantly demand recognition, rewards, conditions, repayment, those are the ones without virtue. And this harkens back to the point we discussed before about how low virtue, the concept of low virtue, needing constant reminders, is no virtue at all. And this is from back in chapter 38. So the first discussion of virtue from Lao Tzu, and the last discussion of virtue in this chapter, they actually form a big circle as well. We circle back to the beginning of the discussion. And then finally, in the last section of 79, Lao Tzu talks about how the heavenly Tao has no favorites and it constantly gives to the people who are good and kind. So that's the final point. And last time, as a recap, we expanded on that. From observation of nature, the sages noted that when it rains, it's raining on everything. The rain doesn't make a difference, a distinction between who should receive the rain and who should not. It doesn't really care. That is the impersonal nature of the Tao. And overall, not just rain, not just other kinds of weather, but with everything, the Tao acts in ways that encompasses all beings. It's like natural laws that apply to all, no matter who you happen to be. There's no concept of special favors, granting miracles in the Tao, and therefore, there's no need to pray, asking for favors or miracles. Now, there's nothing against praying either, but what Tao cultivators do is that they turn the concept into a focusing of the mind. That is, when a Tao cultivator prays, the mindful intent is to focus one's mind on a particular issue rather than praying to a deity, asking for favors, promising good behavior. That would be what I would oftentimes call a transactional type of prayer, transactional type of communication with the divine. I think you already know what that looks like because we kind of all grew up with it. Prayers like, oh, please, grant me this special favor, help me with this, make it come true, make my wish come true, and I promise to be good. I promise I will never do a particular bad thing again. I promise that I will do the good things that the person who's praying imagine that the deity wants. So that is like an exchange, and you are assuming agreement to the offer. If I am good, then you can give me what I want. So it's like going into a store to buy something. That's why I say it's like a transaction, like a monetary exchange. In the Tao, the idea is that focusing on the alignment with the Tao is the key. And sometimes you can use prayers to help you do that. When you are aligned with the divine Tao, things happen naturally in your favor. Good things happen to you because you are good in aligning with the Tao, not because you are behaving in ways that you imagine that the Tao wants. That's the important distinction. The Tao is not a deity. The Tao doesn't want anything. The Tao has no emotions. It is up to you to choose whether or not you want to work in alignment of the natural Tao or against it. The choice, the option is completely up to you. Indeed, a great teacher of the Tao remarked that the original purpose of religions, that's really what it was, is to bring humans into alignment with the divine. But as human beings are oftentimes found doing, the original purpose of religions gets buried under layers of rituals and the trappings, the religious trappings that we're all very familiar with, so that sometimes we can forget what religions were originally meant to do, was about spiritual alignment. And the same great Tao teacher, Tao master, also remarked in the final points about virtue, that virtue is the ultimate standard of existence. I used to not understand why this particular master would emphasize virtue at the final part of this chapter. Now I do. When I have the overview of the structure of the Tao Te Ching, about the second half of the Tao Te Ching focusing on virtues, it makes sense that the Tao master would also be emphasizing that to amplify the point that Lao Tzu was making. So cultivators who understand virtue will not hesitate to practice virtue as soon as possible, as much as possible. This has the power of reshaping our own fate. So the Tao master remarked that fate, destiny, people who seek fortune tellers are the ones who are subjected to their fate, who must be following the destiny that was laid out for them. Being a Tao cultivator means you can transcend that. You can figure out for yourself the likeliness of what will happen if you go down a particular path. And if you want something different, you can pick and choose a better path, one that is more in alignment with the Tao, one that goes along the same direction as the Tao. This is why in an authentic Tao tradition, there is a huge emphasis on self-examination. Reviewing everything that we do. What did I say? What did I do? Was it in accordance with the Tao? How can I do it better? How can I further my virtue, accumulate merit? And that's when we talk about merit, it's from the context of a Buddhist practice. It's the same as virtues in the Tao. So this is the key. This is the key that unlocks the control of our own destiny. It's guided by conscience, our higher selves. And speaking of conscience and our higher selves, the last point made by the Tao master is about actions without attachments. And there again, there's similarity, there's matching teachings from both the Tao and Buddhist Dharmic traditions. And so the example that I used is from Zen Buddhism. The symbol that I use is a combination of the yin and yang symbol in the Buddha. So Huinen, the sixth patriarch, when he learned the Diamond Sutra, which is a very important text in the Buddhist tradition, he became instantly enlightened. He was shocked and surprised and delighted and overwhelmed. And he said, all the 10,000 dharmas are not apart from self-nature. Dharmas being lessons of a dharmic nature, wisdom nature, and the manifestations in the material world, which the ultimate purpose is to teach us dharmic lessons. These are all one and the same to self-nature. What Huinan calls self-nature, we can also call the true self or the soul, depending on your preference. And the potential to become a Buddha is known as Buddha nature. Buddha nature sometimes gets mixed up with self-nature, true self, or the soul. It is actually not exactly those terms. It's about the potentiality of becoming enlightened. So one would not properly use the term Buddha nature to describe inanimate objects that are not sentient. Buddha nature applies to sentient beings. When we act from Buddha nature, there are no attachments. It's just pure compassion. In the Tao, it is known as Wu Wei, actions without attachments. Wu means none, having none. Wei means action. On the face of it, people misunderstand that it means non-action. In reality, it's the Taoist action which is taken without attachments. It can sometimes be non-action. That is, when you observe the world and you realize that there's nothing really you need to do to interfere, you can let the matter play out on its own. That will be non-action, but it's a subset of the overall meaning of Wu Wei. More often, it's minimal action, doing just enough to set things on the right path, and doing so without attachments, which goes back to the metaphor in this chapter about holding the left part of the contract, but expecting nothing in return. Rather, paying it forward so that the recipient, someone who has quote unquote borrowed money from you, spiritual currency from you, can go on and lend spiritual currency to other people who are in need of it. So ultimately, that's what this chapter is all about. It's a great conclusion from this particular Tao master that I study under, and I wanted to make sure that it is shared with this group. And the last recap is when we talked about the balancing Tao. The yin and yang symbol, we understand it to be balanced, and people would oftentimes look at the yin and yang symbol and say that it's, well, it's light and darkness. Sometimes people say it's good and evil. That is a very superficial and incorrect understanding of the yin and yang symbol. In the actual Tao traditions, it's much more intricate and it makes much more sense. So the balance in the center of the slide is meant to depict this cosmic balance, this balancing mechanism of the heavenly Tao. The way that this manifests in reality are listed as the examples here. There are times when we see visible gains by certain individuals, but we're not aware of the unseen losses because we don't see it. It's not on the surface. Someone who's making great gains materially in terms of wealth, fame, positions of power, may have hidden losses that we don't know about. We've not seen it. And it may be a toll on this person's health because of the stress and tension. It may be a toll taken on family life, estrangement, or the family having friction within. It may be the breakup of the most important relationships, whether that is a close friendship or marriage. Whatever form it takes, it's a loss. And it's oftentimes the case, not always, but oftentimes the case that when someone gains in an overt fashion, obvious fashion, that person loses in a covert or not so obvious fashion. We see that all the time. Whereas, if that person is aware of the Tao and follows the Tao, it can be all gain and no loss. It can be in alignment with the Tao. That's the key. So the reverse is also true. Someone who appears to be losing on the surface may actually be gaining. And last time I used this particular gathering as an example that I myself, I know I've spent a lot of time and effort on it. So has Mark. Now, we're not being compensated in a material sense because both Mark and I are volunteers. And yet we continue to do it week after week. Why is that? Well, it is because of the unseen gains running through the 3 points there. This applies to both myself and Mark. The work is its own reward, and I feel amply rewarded speaking for myself. Doing this work gives me much greater harmony in life. The reason is because I learn from these lessons as much as anyone who's listening in. I'm listening in as well. This is essentially a channeling process of great wisdom. Karma returns multiplied. This is very true. And the good that I do in the world and that I hope to accomplish more of in the world, I know, just like a farmer planting crop, knowing that this will result in harvest, I know that at some point, karma will ensure that the goodness comes back to me, usually from a completely different direction. For that reason, I want to encourage everyone to keep this balancing mechanism of the heavenly Tao in mind. And then think about also, what can you do to put in the work and the time in helping other people? Hold the left parts of the contract to yourself and see how the mechanism of cosmic balance will turn around and cause goodness to occur within your own life. So that is the recap from last time. We are now ready to do the paraphrase. And our purpose to paraphrase the original into modern vernacular is to demonstrate understanding. And we start with section 1. Section 1 says, after settling a great dispute, there must be remaining resentments. How can this be considered good? So with these lines, we can expand on it into the following paraphrase. In the aftermath of contention, a big disagreement, an argument, a fight, we may try to patch things up and let bygones be bygones. Unfortunately, there's always some resentment remaining, no matter how hard we try to forgive and forget. Surely, this cannot be a good thing. We've definitely all seen this to be true. We say it's all water under the bridge, no hard feelings. What's past is past. In reality, people never forget. We don't forget ourselves. Next section, it says, therefore, the sage holds the left parts of the contract, but does not demand payment from the other person. And remember, these two lines are actually talking about the sage being virtuous. So here's the paraphrase for that. The sages rise above contention. When they help others, they do so unconditionally, without any expectations of payback. They are the lender, not the collector. And I would even say the sages are never the collectors. As I mentioned, they would They would request that the recipients of their spiritual wisdom pay it forward to help other people. Now, section 3, this is explicitly stating the above. Those who have virtue hold the contract. Those without virtue hold the collection. This is, again, in a spiritual context. Remember, Lao Tzu has no intention of suggesting that when we borrow money in the real world, actual material currency, that we should not pay those back. That isn't the message at all. This is about spiritual exchange. So here's the paraphrase. The sages understand having virtues is its own reward. They do not wish to be like the ones constantly demanding payment, thus demonstrating a complete lack of virtues. And finally, the concluding 2 lines. The heavenly Tao has no favorites. It constantly gives to the kind people. And as you have seen in our recap today, there's this mechanism behind the scenes that is ever present, it's omnipresent, and it's always functioning. It is always in motion. So here's the paraphrase I would like to offer for that. The sages never worry because they know the Tao works. Its karmic function will ensure that anyone who gives with kindness in accordance to the Tao will receive abundantly. So there it is, the paraphrase for Tao Te Ching 79. And finally, let's make sure we cover the full circle, tying the last line, which is about the Tao giving to the good, to the beginning, which is about resentments, disputes. So here's the full circle. In the last lines of Tao Te Ching 79, Lao Tzu says that Tao gives to the good and kind-hearted. We can link this back to the beginning to see the settling of great disputes or conflict. So when you tie the 2 things together, you are connecting the people who are good and kind-hearted. Those are the ones who settle disputes. Those are the ones who bring about peace and harmony. They have the qualification. They are recognized as being qualified as peacemakers. They are the ones who, when they speak and say, let's all simmer down, let's all back away from this, let's all cool off and then talk about it like rational human beings, they have the authority to be able to say something like that. Because of this, we can see that being good, being kind, goodness in general in the Tao is an active principle. It's about taking actions. It's about doing what is good, applying the lessons to life. It isn't passive. It's not about good intentions, good positive thoughts. Those are all well and fine, but they don't get results in the material world. Goodness in the Tao is not something that keeps to itself. It is something that reaches out to help other human beings. And that is why this chapter is all about that lending agreement. Whenever you have this lending agreement, whether material or spiritual, you're talking about an interaction between 2 parties, the lender and the borrower. So this is not just about solitary practice, but about us, all of us, in a group setting, interacting with everybody around us. This is another way, this is yet another way to see that the Tao isn't and has never been about a solitary practice, like moving to the mountains, living in a cave, far away from civilization as a hermit. As I have remarked quite a few times before, that is only a very inaccurate and very distorted stereotype about the Tao. So finally, I want to emphasize the last two lines from this chapter. The heavenly Tao has no favorites. It constantly gives to the kind people. So remember, hold the left parts of the contract. Be the lender, not the collector. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Let us all travel safely so we can meet again. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.